Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Goldsmith. I am an intern at the SUNY Old Westbury Media Innovation Center. I am also the co-executive producer at OWTV News. It is an honor to welcome Dr. Noam Chomsky, an expert in linguistics, to discuss the coronavirus pandemic. Dr. Chomsky, how are you today?
Pleased to be with you.
Thank you so much. And we understand your time is limited, so we have about 5 questions to ask.
Okay, let's march ahead.
So in urban cities in the US, like New Orleans, Blacks make up 70% of coronavirus deaths, similar to its kind of pattern during Hurricane Katrina. Can you talk about the inherent societal problems, especially in the US, that have led the coronavirus to disproportionately affect the Black and brown and poor populations?
Well, a real answer would start 400 years ago. I'm not going to run through the details, but you know them very well. First came the most vicious version of slavery in human history. There's been slavery in the past, but nothing like what was instituted in the American South. That is the basis for U.S. prosperity. That's cotton was the oil of the 19th, 18th, 19th century. Cheap cotton was the basis for, in the United States, in England, for the development of manufacturing, textile manufacturing, finance that was developed to make the system work, commerce, retail, obviously. In fact, the whole economy was basically based on slavery, just as oil was a large basis of the Industrial Revolution, coal and oil, basis for the Industrial Revolution. Theoretically, slavery ended after the Civil War, 15th Amendment, theoretically. There was a decade of Reconstruction, in fact, when Blacks were pretty free and advanced considerably, taking over politically and economically, doing, coming out of a horrible background, but doing about as well as could be imagined under the circumstances. That ended in 1877 with a compact between the North and the South, which essentially told the South, do whatever you like. Actually, we're seeing that right now in another form, when the Roberts Court, most reactionary court in history, told the South that you can steal any way you like, and if you want to keep Blacks from voting, fine, you can figure out any way to do it. It's what they did when they rescinded the Voting Rights Act. All right, that happened in 1877, but on a much broader scale. It introduced what one on the top calls slavery in another form. In fact, a better form from the point of view of the masters. If you have slaves, you have to keep them alive. If you get the government to imprison them and then rent them when you need them, you don't have any responsibility. Taxpayer keeps them alive. And that's what happened. So the South, apart from massacres and lynching and so on to intimidate people, the South instituted procedures which would essentially send much of the, especially male population, to jail. Some guys standing on a street corner, a sheriff can come up and charge him with vagrancy, and goes to the judge, gives him some fine he can't pay, goes to jail. Next thing he's on a chain gang or being handed over to a steel company for cheap worker. Perfect labor force. Can't protest. Somebody else pays for them. That's the basis for the Second Industrial Revolution, large part of it. Goes on until the Second World War, pretty much. I can remember that from childhood, when all the Black domestic workers disappeared and went off to work in manufacturing plants because they were needed. Then comes a short period, wartime, in the early period after it, when the New Deal system was still operative, when blacks had a brief opportunity to enter into American life, like some auto worker, black auto worker could get a little money, send his kid to school or something like that. But there were problems. There was a lot of housing, federal housing developed during the early post-war period, Levittown's and others, that offered relatively inexpensive housing to people like the man I was just talking about, but he couldn't apply because federal law required segregation in public housing. That lasted until the late 60s. Liberal people in Congress voted for, they hated it, but they voted for it because there was no other way to get any funding for public housing. Southern Democrats had a lock on the system. They always get voted into office, so they had all the top chairmanships, and they could block anything that interfered with the segregation they loved. Finally, in the late 60s, that began to dissolve under the civil rights movement. It was too late. By then, stagnation begins. Pretty soon, the neoliberal policies begin. Real wages for male workers are about what they were in the 1970s. And of course, that makes it worse for Afro-American workers for all these reasons. Without going into further detail, we get up to today. Poverty, discrimination, racism overwhelmingly affect Black people. When this morning, you may have noticed the EPA, which used to be a reasonable organization, is now run by commercial interests under Trump, just eliminated regulations that require manufacturers, fossil fuel companies, to reduce mercury pollution. Who dies from mercury pollution? People who live near refineries, manufacturing installations. It's not people like me. I live in the suburbs. It's people like Afro-Americans. So today's decision was in order to kill Black children. Okay, let's be honest. That's what it was in order to do. Maybe that's not in the minds of the businessmen who did it, but if they're capable of thinking for 2 minutes, I assume they have that much intelligence, they can see that this is exactly accurate. Well, that goes on to your question. Of course, this is going to happen with people who've had 400 years of brutal, violent repression, have been blocked at every turn, are now living in severe, not only just poverty, but constant racism. Black lawyer can be walking down the street dressed better than I'd ever be dressed and arrested and asked for identification. If he says something, sent to jail. Plenty of cases like that. It's all over, Okay, that's it. This is one case of it.
It's very interesting. Thank you so much. So what kinds of drastic changes do you think we need to see to address healthcare disparity to prevent future similar problems?
Quite a few. And this, what I just described, it's obvious what the changes ought to be. They're not happening, they're going in the other direction. Though there are groups like, say, Black Lives Matter and others who are pushing the envelope, like Sanders gave an opportunity for it. Could happen. But there are lots of other things. There's some things that are happening now that are pretty startling, and I don't see anybody commenting on it. So let's talk about them. Take a look at the Sanders campaign. Across the spectrum is being criticized. On the right, of course, the obvious criticisms. But as usual, the more interesting criticisms are on the left. What's called the left. The left end of the mainstream spectrum. Left liberal commentators in the New York Times. Notice what they're saying. They're saying, we think Sanders' ideas are pretty good, but the American people aren't ready for them. Just let's take that apart for a minute. What are Sanders' main proposals? Universal health care free higher college education. That's too much for the American people. Other countries have it. All of Europe has it. Every major country, many others, has some form of universal health care. Right to the north of us, they have it. Most countries, in fact, the ones that do best in educational efforts, have free higher public education. In Finland, Germany, just look south of the border, Mexico, poor country, a lot of money for facilities, but the educational system is fine. In fact, I just got off my last interview, happened to be with a college in Mexico, which is very high quality. I've taught at Noam major university, free, very high quality. So what these left commentators are saying is the United States is such a backward country that it can't even begin to rise to the level of most other countries, rich and poor. I mean, that's the kind of condemnation of a society that you might hear from its worst enemies. Does anybody notice? I mean, these are the kind of questions that should be in people's minds. Yes, of course, these are the kinds of changes that took place. We should rise to the level of civilization and culture of most other societies, but we can surely do way better than that. After all, this is the richest country in the world. It has incomparable advantages. No other country has anything like the internal resources, material, others. It's a homogeneous country. You can fly from Boston to Los Angeles. You think you're in the same country when you get out. A slightly different accent, maybe a little warmer. But there's no place like that anywhere. And yet we have such a dysfunctional political and economic system that we can't even rise to the level of other countries. Surely that can be overcome.
Very interesting, yes. And so the President of the United States is talking about reopening the economy soon. Do you think that this rush to reopen the world economies is the wish of the rich at the expense of the working class and the poor?
Well, I don't consider myself a specialist. I rely on the scientists and the experts. They're almost uniform in saying that this will be devastating for poor and working people, which is already happening today. Who are the people exposing themselves today? Not me. I'm isolated. I consider it home, do things by the internet. What about the guys who are working in a grocery store, packaging the things that I can order on the phone? What's happening to the bus drivers? Are they exposed? In fact, just take even privileged people, doctors and nurses. I mean, they're incredible what they're doing. They're working on the front lines without protection. Why without protection? Because of the malevolence of the people in the government. It's exactly true. It's not mince words. January and February, perfectly well known there's a pandemic. What was the White House doing? Exporting ventilators and masks and other equipment to China and other places to try to improve the trade balance so it would look better for the election. Now that's just the tip of an iceberg. It goes all the way back. I mean, why do we have a pandemic in the first place? Go back to 15 years, SARS epidemic, another coronavirus. It was known very well at that time that a pandemic is coming, kept regular, as probably a coronavirus pandemic. Scientists were saying it. The much vilified World Health Organization was saying it. In fact, as late as last September, the World Health Organization issued a warning to to all countries, mainly developed ones, to prepare for an oncoming pandemic. Okay, perfectly well known. Why didn't it happen? Well, three reasons. First, capitalist market failure, ordinary capitalist failure. Somebody's got to pick up the ball and run with it. What about drug companies? They have the facilities, the wealth, very wealthy because of the gifts we lavish on them to go into that. Did they do it? No. Market signals were wrong. You don't make profit by preparing for a pandemic that's going to destroy the society. That's somebody else's business. Well, the government could step in the way we eradicated polio, program initiated by Roosevelt, funded by the government. Salk vaccine, Salk insisted be given free with no patent. That was in the days of more regimented capitalism. But remember Ronald Reagan in his inaugural speech, government is the problem, not the solution. Okay, he didn't make it up. He was being handed the words, but the people who handed him the words know what that means. That means take decisions away from the government, which is flawed because it's under some public influence. Hand decisions over to institutions which don't have that flaw. Private corporations, tyrannies which are unaccountable to the public. That's what's called liberty in the United States, it's called libertarian. So if you do that, then the government is sidelined. Clinton added to it severely. It goes on. So when you get to the early days of the coronavirus, the government can't step in, they're the problem. Then comes the neoliberal plague, and it's another hammer blow, which I've actually just described, not just you can't follow market signals, but the government can't step in. Then comes something special to the United States. Happens to me in the hands of a sociopath, manic sociopath. I'm not mincing words, I just want to tell the truth. It's a fact. Trump, during his 4 years in office, has steadily defunded the Center for Disease Control and other health-related parts of the government. This is while the pandemic warnings are coming. Okay, that's good. When the warnings come, first of all, the administration didn't pay any attention. Now they blame the World Health Organization. They're the ones to blame. It wasn't until March that something actually penetrated while he was, instead of playing golf and watching his TV ratings, he heard somebody on Fox News saying there's a pandemic. Okay, so he said something way too late. Meanwhile, he came out with a federal budget, February 10th, middle of the pandemic. Take a look at the federal budget. Further cuts in the Center for Disease Control and other health-related parts of the government. Increase in the subsidies to fossil fuels, which are going to destroy us. And of course, increases for the military and this famous wall. What's the name for this? I mean, sociopath too strong? I don't think so. You put those three things together, you get the situation we're in now. Countries in East Asia listened when China gave out all the information in early January. It was all there, even sequenced the genome. They listened, they did something about it. They're in pretty good shape. Some of them very good shape, like Taiwan. Europe was kind of slow on the uptake, but they finally got started. So different things. Then comes the United States, the outlier. Did nothing. It's now the only country in the world that can't even provide data to the World Health Organization on infections and deaths, because we're too dysfunctional to do that. And of course it shows. It's the epicenter of the pandemic. Way more deaths growing at a rate they are nowhere else. And every day you find out more, like people are found in hotel rooms and nursing homes who just died and nobody noticed. Now that's the result of three hammer blows: capitalist logic, neoliberalism, and a gang of sociopaths running the place. So that's what happens. It's not a law of nature. Could have been stopped. And if we want to protect ourselves from the next pandemic, which is almost certainly coming, we've got to think through these things and remedy them, or else we'll be in much deeper trouble. And meanwhile, there's a lot of people are being told, well, we can't really plan for the future. Now we have to take care of this urgent problem. Everybody in the activist community is being told that. Some people aren't listening. There are people who pursue class war relentlessly, never stop, make use of every opportunity. They're doing it right now, like the EPA regulations this morning. Let's make sure to make the future world as dangerous as possible for poor and working people, and in fact for everybody with global warming. More subsidies for fossil fuels, same thing. They're working hard. They don't relax. Right now, take a look at the stimulus bill, huge stimulus bill. $500 billion is being given under the supervision of Donald Trump and his sycophant. Are they going to, suppose Congress passes legislation, are they going to pay any attention to it? Who's going to do anything if they don't? Are they going to impeach him? No. So they'll do whatever they want. And we can see what's happening right now. So say, take the airline industry. It's pleading for $50 billion. Why does it need $50 billion? Well, take a look. After the financial crisis, profits were booming. Did they use them to improve service, to improve the business? No. They used them on stock buybacks. Stock buybacks are market interference, which inflates the stock value, benefits the wealthy shareholders, shoots the salaries of and stock options of the management into the stratosphere. $45 billion they spent on that. That's what they're now asking for. Is it possible in the stimulus bill to put in a condition saying no more stock options if you get a cent from us? It's not only possible, it's easy. That was the law until Ronald Reagan. No stock options. Couldn't do it. It was illegal. Treasury Department enforced it. There weren't any. And same with tax havens. None before Reagan. It was illegal. Treasury Department enforced it. Now it's tens of trillions of dollars robbed from people like you and me. Could we go back to those conditions? I mean, I talked before about rising to the level of other countries. How about rising to the level of the United States pre-Reagan? That can be done. It's not terribly utopian. And many more things could be added. There could be conditionalities in the stimulus saying, you've got to put workers on your management board to represent the interests of the working class. You have to maintain a living wage, not just a minimum wage. You talk about a $15 an hour minimum wage. That's a bit of a joke. If you trace the minimum wage through the period pre-neoliberalism, before the neoliberal plague, the minimum wage tracked gross domestic product and productivity. Then it breaks, stays flat, which means it reduces because of inflation. If the minimum wage had increased as it did up till the late 70s, it'd probably be about $25 an hour now. So put a condition on saying you have to have a livable wage for your workforce. And not just for your workforce, also for the precarious workforce. And one of the contributions of neoliberalism has been, of course, to destroy unions, which enable people to get some rights, but also to shift the workforce so that most of it is precarious. You get called if they want you. You're not on a regular salary. It's called the gig economy, the precarious economy. Those people don't get anything from the stimulus. They're not called workers. Large part of the economy, and you can go on from there. Like we certainly should rise to the level of having universal health care like other countries, and also unemployment insurance. Like the unemployment figures are skyrocketing in the United States. Right? Nothing like that elsewhere, because they have fixed regulations which keep people employed, and you pay for it. If there's some reason they can't work, they put them on part-time or something, but keep keep them employed and part of the enterprise. My feeling, that's nowhere near enough. They should just take over the enterprise, but put that aside. Keeping the basic system that it is, there are things that can be done right away that can make it far better and more humane.
And it's so scary to see the rates of unemployment. It's really, really terrifying. And definitely this country should have been more prepared. So we are used to big societal gatherings. We're used to big social gatherings like birthday parties, concerts, and even going to the movies or theater. Do you think the virus will mean a permanent change to the American way of life?
It will make a change. Question is, what kind of change? And as I mentioned, there's a group right now working to institute the kind of change they want. More repression, more profit for the privileged, worse conditions for working people, deaths for Black children. They're doing it right now. Question is, are there going to be counterforces? Take a look at Bernie Sanders' withdrawal speech. At the very end of the speech, he said, "This campaign is ending for now. The movement is going on." That's the crucial message. We're kind of trained to think that our role in the political world is to show up. My dog doesn't agree. To show up every 4 years and push a lever and then go home and leave it to somebody else. That's not the way it should work. It should be there all the time, pressing, working, making change. That's the way things happen. Civil rights movement, feminist movement. Down. Okay. We're going to have a visitor in a minute. But see, some people are fighting all the time, but we have to do it too. And it's got to be done on an international scale. It's very hard to find much of any coherence in the freak show in the White House, but there's some things happening, and they're quite important. So on the international level, the Trump administration, maybe Trump doesn't know it, the people who are doing any thinking in his administration are doing something very significant. They're carefully constructing a reactionary international headed by the White House, encompassing the most reactionary states in the world, Middle East, the Gulf dictatorships, Egypt under the worst dictatorship it's ever had, Israel, which has moved so far to the right, you need a telescope to see it, moving on to India, under the control of a fanatic Hindu nationalist trying to destroy secular democracy in India, crushing Kashmir, hundreds of millions of Muslims under severe threat. He'll be part of it. Guys like Orban in Hungary, who's turning it into a dictatorship. Salvini in Italy, whose great joy in life is helping people fleeing from misery in Africa to drown in the Mediterranean. Now that'll be the other guys like it elsewhere. Now that's the international run by the White House. Now there is another one being formed. Bernie Sanders and Yanis Varoufakis, a fine economist in Europe, have called for what they call a progressive international. It's going to have its first conference in November, based partly on things like the Sanders movement here, on the very important movement that Varoufakis initiated in Europe, the M25 it's called, which is a Europe-wide movement to try to save what's of value in the European Union and get rid of the part that's rotten. It's a big popular-based movement, bringing in people from the global south, movements from the global south. That can form on the international level, but we have plenty to do on the domestic level to try to overcome this malignancy. and go back to some kind of functioning, decent society, and then go on from there.